My name's Brandon and this is Video Game History, a show where I take a look back on a certain franchise of video games and retrospectively review them. This week we come to another Cartoon Network game on the PS2, Xbox and Gamecube. Ed, Edd and Eddy the Mis-Edventures was released on September 30, 2005 and is the second of 3 games to be based off the Ed, Edd and Eddy franchise. However, it's the first and only game to be released on home consoles. The game was also released on the Game Boy Advance, offering a 2D version where there are a few unique levels. I'm not really going to touch on this version too much as it's basically the same as the home console versions and not unique enough to warrant its own discussion. The game was developed by Artificial Mind and Movement, who are now known as Behaviour Interactive, and have an extensive experience developing licensed games for companies like Disney and franchises like Looney Tunes. Despite most of their work being in licensed video games, the Mis-Edventures is the only time they've ever developed a Cartoon Network game. The most well-known games they've developed are things like Halo Wars Definitive Edition, Fallout Shelter, and the Naughty Bear series. The now defunct Midway Games served as the game's publisher. The Metacritic scores for the various versions range from about 50 to 56, which is poor, but also means it's one of the higher ranking games based on a Cartoon Network franchise. I was not a fan of the first Ed, Edd and Eddy game, but I've been pleasingly surprised with how the home console Cartoon Network games have been so far, so will this game continue that trend? Ed, Edd and Eddy the Mis-Edventures is a 3D platformer, with each level labelled a scam. Despite calling them scams, none of the levels actually involve you pulling off scams, except for the very first one. Just like the first Ed, Edd and Eddy game, you have control of all 3 Eds, and they each have their own unique abilities. Depending on who you're currently controlling, you can create a tower of Eds, make a trampoline to jump onto higher ledges, and use Ed as a battering ram. Outside of these special team moves, Ed can lift heavy objects, Double D can use a slingshot, and Eddy can throw stink bombs. The movesets are pretty basic, but where the characters feel most unique is in the way they move. The developers nailed the different movement styles of each character and it's spot on to how they move around in the show. Speaking of nailing the feeling of the show, many background tracks from the show are used throughout the game and it helps make the vibe of the game match the same vibe of the show. Just moving around in levels with the familiar tunes fans know and love from the show contributes to a more enjoyable experience. Unfortunately, they don't nail the show's art style as accurately during the cutscenes. Every other Cartoon Network game on these platforms so far has stuck with using the in-game 3D models for their cutscenes. However, the developers here used a mixture of in-game cutscenes and 2D animated cutscenes. The problem with the 2D scenes is that they are of such a low quality to the point where it's actually kind of embarrassing. Heck, the mouth movements don't even properly sync up with the voices most of the time. I appreciate them wanting to use cutscenes in the same style that the show uses, but if they couldn't manage a decent level of quality, they should have just stuck to the in-game models. This decision is a microcosm of what is wrong with the game. There are plenty of good ideas here, but the overwhelming majority of them are so poorly executed that it just affects the player's enjoyment. Another example of this is the cul-de-sac acting as a hub world. Running around the most iconic and memorable setting of the show seems like a cool idea in theory, but in execution it adds absolutely nothing and makes getting to the next level a pain in the ass. This hub world doesn't offer you anything to do, so I don't understand why they couldn't have just funneled you from level to level the same way Codename Kids Next Door did. Teammate AI is also horrendous. So many times they would get themselves stuck and I'd have to come get them out of their predicament, or even worse, they would just stop following me for no apparent reason. Combat manages to somehow be a significant part of this game thanks to the amount of enemies they throw at you. These enemies aren't exactly threatening, but are so frustratingly tedious. It takes way too long to defeat these simple enemies, and to top everything off, the hit detection in this game is poor. Considering they're not even remotely a threat to wipe out your health, I can only assume the enemies exist to unnecessarily slow down the player. This makes even more sense considering the game is only about 2 hours long. You have 6 levels to play through and can unlock 2 bonus levels by collecting clothes that are hidden in sandboxes. Throughout these levels you'll also be picking up jawbreakers, which unlocks cheat codes for you to use. Similarly, you'll find money in each level, which is only used to buy more jawbreakers and unlock more cheats. A far more interesting addition is the chicken chasing minigame present in every level, which rewards you with a literal Easter egg if you catch it. These eggs unlock new costumes as well as sound and video clips. This is a neat little idea, but because there are only 6 levels, they can't really offer you much. To top it all off, the game just has incredibly clunky controls. Basically every aspect of this game frustrates the player.
Three heroes! Loved by millions!
It's a dreamy.
Ready for adventure!
It's the end!
Ed, Double D, and Eddy!
I just want to hug that little loudmouth one.
Starring in their own video game, Ed, and Eddy, the Mis-Edventures.
Dorks.
In this tag team adventure, switch Eds on the fly to take advantage of their unique abilities. When you need raw strength, Ed can give you a lift. Or use his head. When you need brains, Double D can make things go. And in a pinch, he can pull out his trusty slingshot. Eddy can usually scam his way out of any situation. And when he can't, there's always the El Mundo Stink Bomb!
Ed, and Eddy the Mis-Edventures is a missed opportunity. The idea that levels would each be a scam could have been cool, but they only really used this idea for the tutorial level. A foundation for a good Ed, and Eddy game is here, as the sound is spot on, the characters' movement animations are replicated well, and the 3D environments are a pretty damn good recreation of a 2D show. Usually a 2D show being put into a 3D world will look off, but the developers actually succeeded here, so it's a shame almost everything else is off. The teammate AI needed a serious overhaul, the 2D cutscenes are laughably bad, the hub world doesn't need to exist, and enemy overkill just makes this a frustrating experience. There's still one more Ed, and Eddy game to come, this time on the Nintendo DS, but I'm starting to lose faith that an Ed, and Eddy game with enjoyable gameplay can be pulled off.